Hello, and welcome once again to the wonderful world of career counseling. Your host, Stephen Joy here. Today, we're going to have a relatively brief talk on the subject of the interpretation of the strong interest inventory. Okay, so that said, here we go. The strong interest inventory. This, as you can see by the booklet and by the haircut of the gentleman on the screen, is an instrument that's been around a while. However, it has been updated, I promise. You may have initially thought, oh, it measures how strong my interests are. Then you look at the name of the author and go, oh, Ed Strong, what do you know? But, it actually does measure how strong your interests are, even though it was written by a guy with the coincidentally perfect name of Edward K. Strong. So yeah, I said this has been around a while. In fact, the original Strong Vocational Interest Blank was published in 1927. So it's one of the older psychological tests still in existence. Naturally, it's been revised and updated multiple occasions, and sometimes the name has changed along the way. So in 1974, the first, I think, major update after Strong had died, or that he wasn't involved in at any rate, which was co-authored by Campbell. Today, it's simply called the Strong Interest Inventory. Uh, uh, by matter of history, if you're into psych testing, this is actually, to my knowledge, the very first test ever developed using the so-called empirical keying method, best known on the, of course, MMPI. And this is a method, for those who aren't familiar with it, under which we don't make any assumptions about what people belonging to a certain group are going to say, what they're going to agree or disagree with. Instead, we first get a sample of folks, from all walks of life, what have you, and then we kind of snag samples of people belonging to very specific groups. We have now the complete set of responses provided by our hundreds or thousands of ordinary folks from every walk of life, on every item, mind you, on the test. And we have the same findings for the however many people, 100 or 200 or whatever, who belong to our narrowly defined group. And the scoring key is derived, yes, empirically. What we do is compare for each item what the people in our target group said with what people in the broader reference group said. And so you develop a set of items, identify a set of items that actually do differentiate members of your target group from members of everybody else kind of wished together. And again, this was famously employed on the MMPI for diagnostic categories. Here, we're not concerned with anything pathological. We're concerned with occupations and what do you do for a living. So you're starting with the basic idea that there are certain tasks involved in being an electrician or a librarian or a social worker, and that people who are successfully and happily employed in the field probably enjoy or find those tasks interesting. So you're looking for, what their interests are. And if your interests, sir or madam, happen to be a close fit with those of an electrician or a librarian or a social worker, then it is quite possible that you too would find the work interesting. And if you have the necessary aptitude to succeed in the field, you would very likely have a thriving career. That's the gist of it, and it's a brilliant idea, really, which is Strong's great theoretical contribution to test development. So you have on the Strong a number of these so-called occupational scales. Now, how do you find people who are successfully and happily employed in a field? You go to who's in the trade or professional association. So, if I wanted to develop a scale for librarian work, I'd, go to the membership rolls of the American Library Association, because, they are librarians, they are presumably working in the field, and that's why they keep up their dues, and they must kind of like it a little bit because they're choosing to maintain their membership, who's in whatever trade guild or whatever, these are the people who are doing it. and really identify with what they're doing. And that's again the origin here. Now, that's not all there is on the test, because there have been several, as I mentioned, several revisions, and in the course of some of those revisions, they don't only update the occupational scales, but also add new sorts of scales, which we will look at shortly. So in 1968, which would have been a revision that Strong was probably beginning to work on before he died. I'm not positive about that. So-called basic interest scales were added. One problem. Let's just stop to think about for a moment. There are thousands of possible occupations out there. There are hundreds of relatively large occupations, ones in which tens or hundreds of thousands of people are employed, at least tens of thousands, and each to develop an individual scale for each one would be an incredible amount of work. I mean, even on the scale that this thing is developed, it's pretty incredible. So, what if you can only put together 100 or 150 occupational scales? That's an important sampling. And of course, you're going to select occupations that, again, are relatively large and represent different aspects of life, different kinds of interests. But there's inevitably going to be an awful lot not on it. So the basic interest scales cover sort of clusters of interests. So let's say, for example, you have elementary school teachers, and you have special education teachers, and you have math teachers, and you have, university faculty members. Well, there could then be a general occupational theme for, teaching and educational professions, right? In 1974, this is when the Strong Campbell version came out. They got around to adding in Holland codes, this famous RIASEC system that's covered in another of my talks if you don't already know it. But it's really a more broad spectrum personality model based on interests. So now you have, the 100 and some odd occupational codes, the several dozen basic interest scales, the 6 broad interests on the RIASEC model. And more recently still, they've added these so-called personal style scales, which provide a little extra information. Okay. Some of you, if you've seen any of my other little career counseling presentations, know that I search for career counseling comics, and discovered along the way that, in fact, Superboy had a side career when he wasn't fighting super criminals of providing career advice. So here he gets some young fella who just can't seem to sell anything and keeps going for sales jobs, to realize that his true passion is that he likes working on cars. So it's a mechanic job. Woo, go Superboy. Okay, look, the Strong, it isn't a terribly long inventory, and by the way, it needs to be computer scored. It has needed to be computer scored for a very long time. It's far too complex to hand score. In the not too distant past, you could fill it out, paper and pencil, and you would then mail it or FedEx it to their scoring center. Now it's fully online. But the test, it's broken down into 8 little subsections. One of them very straightforward. It's a list of occupations, and for each one you say like, dislike, or indifferent, basically, or say strongly like, indifferent, dislike, strongly dislikes. You have a 5-point scale, likert-type scale there. And the first part is a list of occupations, so it's like, librarian, I like that, and there you are. The second section, also pretty transparent, is school subjects, so social studies, right, or chemistry, or what have you. Then you have activities, just things you might be doing, leisure activities. Do you like to go kayaking? Do you like to go dancing? Do you like to veg out in front of the TV set? I don't think they have that one, actually. Types of people you might want to, would you like or dislike, again, strongly or strongly in both directions, being, spending time or getting to know people like this. And then you have a section where it's forced choice, and you've got to, it's a this or a that. You've got to pick one or the other. Various characteristics that you might ascribe to yourself, and preferences about the nature of the work you might be doing, like with people, for example, that sort of thing. So that's it. Each section is goes by pretty quickly. It is not a terribly lengthy test, half hour, 35, 40 minutes maybe to take it. And so now let's look a little at the, under the hood at what's gone on to establish the norms and so forth. Uh, the general sample, the one that just sort of represents, Americans, is a little over 2,000 people. It was stratified to match US Census data on several parameters. I don't recall exactly which ones, but I think region of residence, ethnicity, um, and urban, suburban, rural may have been included, maybe educational level. And it's also 50-50 male, female. No, they haven't gotten around to dealing with a multi-gendered world yet. None of these people have. Uh, Again, within each of the occupational groups for the occupational scales, these have to be people on the current edition who've been in the field for more than 3 years and report themselves as being happy in it. So, the old days, it was just, go to the trade show and, grab all the carpenters who are at the trade show. Now it's a little more systematic. And the occupational scales, of course, do keep changing. In particular, some occupations may dwindle and fade away, while others, start to become more and more prominent. One example that's been very evident to me in training counselors is that somewhere in the early 2000s, mental health counselor was added. So, in the 1980s, 90s, and very early 2000s, that wasn't a separate category. So you had, what you do when you don't have your category is you sort of generalize from related ones. So, gee, who's kind of like a mental health counselor? Well, a psychologist, a social worker, a rehabilitation counselor, actually a speech pathologist pops up a lot on my counseling and my art therapy students too. So, you perfectly well you can perfectly well generalize. There is, cross ethnic group research, which is pretty encouraging. It doesn't, ethnicity does not seem to have any particular impact on the basic interest scales, or the personal preference scales, or the occupational theme scales. The overall structure of the RIASEC hexagon is pretty similar across ethnic groups. The one thing to be small caveat here is that the samples for the occupational scales, if you're just looking at electrician or just looking at mental health counselor, don't have enough cases in them to really definitively study the possibility of ethnic differences. So, it's possible that there are on some of the individual occupational scales. We just don't know yet. But for all of the parts of the tests where you can use the larger, 2,250 person sample, very encouraging. There are not any substantial differences across ethnic groups. Are there sex differences? Yes, absolutely. Those, of course, to a large extent, probably reflect genuine population differences in average interests. So the technical weeds, very quickly. Reliability of the test is quite strong. So we can look at internal consistency, we can look at test-retest reliability, and I believe that's after just a couple of months, not like years. Interests can change after all. For the general themes, look at those beautiful numbers: 0.92 internal consistency, 8.5 test-retest. The basic interests, pretty close to the same. The occupational scales, we can't really look at internal consistency because it's a funky pattern, but of how it's calculated. But test-retest is quite strong, and personal styles too. So everything looks beautiful, right? On here, the validity evidence also is pretty strong. So the most obvious thing is to ask, can you tell the difference between the librarians and the everybody else's, or the electricians and the everybody else's? And the answer is, yeah, you can pretty well. The mean scores on the occupational scale for members of the occupation will be at least, usually more than, 2 standard deviations higher. Which means if it was 2 standard deviations, that would mean that something like between 85 to 90% of members of the occupation obtained scores on their own scale higher than 85 to 90% of the people who aren't in the occupation. And considering that some people who aren't librarians would probably enjoy the work of a librarian, ditto electrician, ditto airline pilot, that's actually really excellent. We also can say that you know, when you look at the people in an occupation and how they score on the broader themes, it tends to be a pretty close match to what you would expect thematically. Same is true of college majors. And we also, can have some predictive evidence here. An awful lot of work with the strong is done in private counseling agencies, and they're not conducting major research programs as a rule. But now and then something comes out, or they renorm the test and need to do something. So you got actually a pretty good hit rate here. That is to say that, if you're giving the strong to a bunch of folks in, say, college, and then you come back 5 years later, about 2/3 of them end up in occupations that the strong would have identified as a good fit. About a third don't. I don't know if that means that the test is limited or that they just didn't listen, frankly, but that's how it goes. Oh yes, back to career counseling funnies. We of course all want to select occupations in which we are interested. Sometimes our parents may disagree and feel that our plan, good as it is, as mommy here says, could use some tweaking. Okay. Now, what we're really into today is how do we interpret a report? So, again, you're not hand scoring this. So what you're going to pay for is either a complete interpretive report, if you want to spring for a few extra bucks, or the basic profile report, which, as I record this, goes for about $12, for administration and scoring. So we're going to walk through a sample report, looking at least at part of each page, just to give you an idea of what's going on. What I recommend is that you as a counselor adopt what I'm going to call a top-down approach here. The response summary is quite important. It's shown at the very end, so you could look at it at the beginning, which is probably a pretty good idea, or you could wait till the end and see if there's anything there to surprise you. Usually there won't be. But the highest level of abstraction, again, is the Holland code. So, what are their scores on the RIASEC scales? Next down, the basic interest scales, then the occupational scales. And now you've done the 3 layers, so to speak. And then you can add the supplementary information you get from personal preferences. And that's it. So we're going to walk through a profile. Again, we're going to see about half of each page. You don't need to see the whole thing, but it'll give you the idea. So page 1, not much to be seen here. Is there your client's name, your name, and the setting. Ta-da, you're done. And the date, right? So there's, it's the same otherwise for everybody. This is one downloaded from their own site. So Jane's sample, interpreted by Joe Counselor at Sample College. Page 2, still for you isn't going to be very interesting because once you've seen one, you've seen them all. But for your client, it actually is pretty useful. It's tells them what they're about to be looking at and how to use it, and what it gives you a table of contents, what's in it. It's not individually tailored. So again, you've seen one, you've seen them all. This is part of it. So, it's a cool thing. It's nicely laid out. How the strong can help you, sir, madam, how you'll benefit, and then the table of contents, how your results are organized. Now we start digging into the nitty gritty, your scores on the 6 general themes, the RIASEC scores, and your so-called code type. So here we go. And again, this is the first page that, for me, if I've just given this to a client or a student and I'm going to be sharing it with them, like the first thing I do is flip to page 3 here, right? So you do at the top of it have pretty generic stuff, descriptions of what realistic type, the investigative type, the artistic type, and so forth are all about. That's for your client. You already know that. If you don't, go back and view the Holland talk, or read your textbook if you have one. So brief descriptions, then your scores on each of the 6 scales, and then it gives you what your code type would be, which can be useful in various career exploration tools and databases. Most people are going to get a 3-point code. That's the convention. So if your highest 3 scores are realistic, enterprising, and investigative, for example, you're going to be an REI. You will find, not infrequently, it's only a minority of test takers, but you will find some folks where they get a 2-point code. or occasionally a 1-point code, just S or just E. What that means is that they really expressed very little interest in anything else. You have to be at least moderately interested in a broad cluster, or theme in order for it to appear in your code. So if the only two things you show any real interest in are being investigative and or realistic, you're just going to be an IR. Um, Again, it means you really have said you're not interested in a lot of stuff. I do want to add here that sometimes on the strong, the code will reverse the order of two scales where the scores are close together. This happens most often with realistic and social. These are the two interest scales where males and females differ most sharply, with males tending on average to report much higher levels of R-type interest, banging on things with hammers and so forth, and females tending to report much higher, somewhat higher interest in so-called social activities, which means things like, teaching and helping the kids, right? Sorry, it's what people still say. That may change someday as genders, become, more a bit more androgynous, but it's very clear at the present time. And so, most of the time when I've seen this, it's that you'll have where it makes a difference. Honestly, it doesn't matter if it's like switching in second and third place because SAI and SIA are not that different. You're going to get mostly the same matches wherever you go. But when it's the third and fourth place ones, people sit up and pay attention. I happen to be administering this primarily to students in fields like counseling and art therapy and human services. And most, not all, a majority though, are female. And there are some of them who will have, R as their fourth highest score, but it gets bumped up into the top 3 part of their code, sometimes beating out S, social, which irks them. but it shouldn't. It's an okay thing. And you can always just ignore what the strong did with that and say, well, I don't care what it says. S was my third highest score, so I am going to be, an EAS, whatever they say. Here's what it looks like then. So here you see this person actually does have a 2-point code because they show very little interest in most domains. But as you see, they show a high level of interest in social and a moderate level of interest in artistic. These standard scores, they're not obviously not T-scores, right? If you think of them, this isn't exactly right, but if you think of them kind of like correlations, how strongly correlated are my interests with those of the prototypical, like perfect artistic person, that's probably not too far off, but it's not quite right. Basically, higher is stronger. As you see, above 60 puts you in high territory, above 40 puts you in, actually, I think even above 50 might. 70 would be like very high. You crack just a little over 40, 45 maybe, and you're making your way into moderate. But there it is. So this person, again, has a very well-defined interest in helping others in one way or another, some degree of interest in at least some artistic pursuits, and really not much in anything else. They're totally not looking to change the oil on the car. Okay. Now, page 4 is going to be your basic interest scales. Now, there are 30 of these. So this, whereas you only had 6 occupational themes, now you've expanded to 30 things. So they're whole classes of occupations, taxes and accounting, military occupations, culinary arts, etc. Now, since their introduction in 1968, of course, the Holland themes were added, and so these have actually been folded in under those headings. So you'll find somewhere between 4 and 6 of the basic interest under each heading. So this helps you, it's kind of a nice intermediate thing. The Holland types are just really interesting, but it's not always easy to translate them into, so what occupation do I want? The occupational themes are just not, they're very, very narrow, and there aren't enough of them to really cover the whole wide world of things people do for a living. So these are kind of a nice in-between step. right? Um, and what you'll find is that sometimes, a person will actually have a pretty high score in a broad theme. In this case, I'm saying enterprising, but they're not really that interested in some of the subdomains. So if all you knew was, hey, it's a high enterprising person, among other things, you as a career counselor would be thinking, I bet they do well in marketing, but they might, in fact, within what enterprising is all about, that might be the thing they're least interested in, and that will show on this level. Similarly, the other way around, you can have a person who, on the whole, has a very low score, on a broad theme, but there are one or two subdomains within it that they're actually pretty interested in. One that I actually encounter fairly often is people who are, in general, not zeroed in on the realistic, the tools and machinery thing, but they do actually have moderate or even strong interests in nature and agriculture. Okay, so here's what part of that page looks like. You get your top 5 interest areas and your areas of least interest. This is the same person, I believe. You then see for each cluster, what the different domains are like. So, here we had a person for whom social is clearly far and away the strongest, and not surprisingly, they are pretty interested in most of the subdomains, but not in healthcare services. So, helping to them sounds very good, but when you start getting into medical and nursing stuff, they're really, really not into it. They're basically not into the so-called conventional sorts of tasks, but office management ain't bad for them. So this is again where this can be useful. Now, page 5 introduces the various occupational scales. Most of what you have here is pretty generic. It's basically telling you what the scales are about, a little teeny bit about how they were developed in very much lay language. And do remember that although this doesn't cover everything out there, this is the real heart of the strong. This is where it started, and it's still one of the less common features that the test has today. That you don't just get told how much your broad interests resemble those of people in various occupations, which is what many interest inventories will do. I believe the ONET interest profiler does that, for example. Rather, it actually is telling you how much you really do resemble on a kind of a micro level people who actually are in that particular occupation. So the current edition has 130 occupations for each sex. They this does keep getting changed around, tinkered with. So in our 2012 update, 30 occupations were deleted. They just aren't as prominent anymore. Goodbye. 46 new ones were added because there are whole new ways of making a living in the 21st century. Another 44 were significantly revised or updated, and another 170 were left unchanged. And by the way, notice that adds up to 260, not 130, because each sex has its own norms. You do on this page see your top 10, the occupations, where you are most like the people in it, and off to the side, the 5 that you are least like. I want to emphasize you don't want your client to get fixated on the top 10 and either be like, okay, it has to be one of these, or gee, some of these don't look that good. I don't care. It's only like a teaser to get you to delve into the next page. Sometimes they're going to look right at that page and go, yeah, look at that. But if they don't, it's only 10 out of what might be 40 that they show a high level of interest, or a high level of similarity to in terms of their interests. So, here's that page, just a little bit about it. When I say there are, separate norms for the different sexes, it's, well, how do you know that women who are, pull an occupation out of the air, women who are mechanics or women who are math teachers have the same pattern of interests as men in those occupations? We don't know that, so they're playing it safe and doing it separately. So this person, notice, awful lot like speech pathologist, librarian, mental health counselor, special ed teacher. Of course, these are all high S type occupations. They're probably would be miserable as a physicist, athletic trainer, or veterinarian, for example. Now, yeah, the 3 pages that honestly I have the most fun with, along with the one that gives you the RIASEC code, are the results for the actual occupational scales. It's 3 pages because remember, there are 6 clusters. It is organized under the RIASEC model, and it's going to start with whichever interest theme you have the highest score on. So for this person, it will be social first. So you'll have 2 per page with whatever that would be, 20 to 25 or so occupations under each one. And within each one, it arranges itself from the best match to the worst match. Of course, you're going to get more hits, more good matches among the occupations that fall under a general theme that you had high interest in, but you won't have good matches with all of them, and you will often find some good matches further down the line. So it is actually worth kind of flipping through the whole thing. And it's an amusing way to spend a few minutes anyhow. Plus, this could be your whole life at stake here. So you get these scores. Again, they're kind of like correlations, I guess. The interpretively, a 0.5 and up is like, whoa, Joe, very close match. 0.4 to 0.49 is considered to be a close match that you would probably enjoy most or all of the work tasks performed by these people. Scores in the 30s represent moderate matches. They're not bad. You would probably enjoy some aspects of the work. There might be some other aspects that you just found a bit irksome or onerous. Below 30, 0.30, you're looking at poor matches. Chances are you would actually dislike your daily work if you were doing that. And I would take that seriously. If a client is saying, gee, I always wanted to be one of those, how come I have a 0.23 on it? I wouldn't tell them, well, the test is telling you you shouldn't do it, because tests can be wrong, obviously. But I would say to them, what this is telling you is you should look perhaps a little more closely than you have in the past at what people in that field are actually doing. And let's find a few resources, have you go out and do that before we meet next time. And let me know what you found out. Let's talk about it together. Because look, chances are that they have some inaccuracies in their thinking about what people in said occupation actually are doing with their lives all day. And that once they dig a little deeper, they're going to be saying to you, wow, it's a good thing I didn't go that way, what have you. But again, never tell them they can't do it. And again, don't let them get fixated only on the very best. Gee, how come the field I was thinking of isn't in my top 10, and I only have a 0.44 on it. Fine, it looks like you're a good match for it. There are other reasons you want to do it besides interests. You have values in life, that may match it. You may have some kind of a family history there. I don't know what all else, but there's something. So here's a sample of the beginning of page 3. And remember, this person had a high score on the social themes. So not surprisingly, they have excellent matches with a number of the so-called social occupations, speech pathologist, mental health counselor. We saw some of these in their top 10 overall. You'll see all the way down to middle school teacher and university administrator. We're looking at those very strong matches. And truthfully, all the way down to bartender, where we're getting close to the end of the occupational themes, they're still looking at solid matches here. And again, as you work through each section, you're going to find that whole thing kind of shifting over to the left. Like even the top ones will not be 62s, or there might be one that's up that high and it's going to drop down. But you'll get that same sort of a pattern of less and less interest as you go down each section. The personal style, you can probably tell by my voice, I don't take this part as seriously, but it is useful as supplementary information. Uh, Basically, you get sort of a three possible ratings on each of these styles. There's the for me, this would be left side, right side, or kind of mid-range, where it's like you don't go one way or another. There's work style, which is kind of like an introversion, extroversion thing. Do you rather work alone? Do you rather work with others? Learning environment, or when you're going to learn something, do you want it just to be like quick, practical, get me there, I can do it now, thanks, no more teaching, or do you actually enjoy going a bit more in depth and spending time thinking about it and reading about it and so forth? Your leadership style, which is pretty much more asking, like, do you want to be in a leadership role? Like, how comfortable are you with, being the take charge gal, or the guy who's always voicing his opinions? And a risk taking one, which is, how comfortable are you with, things fast paced, fast moving, a lot of pressure on you, and maybe things could go badly wrong if you make the wrong call, etc. Again, very, very useful stuff, because this does certainly moderate what you would find in, the what you would find based on interests alone. Oh, and of course, team orientation. Sorry about that. Do you prefer independent work or collaborative work? So this is what that page looks like. And you see at the top, it simply tells you which side you fall on. So this person likes working with people. Surprise for a social, right? They're extroverted. They do enjoy learning through lectures and books. They do like to take charge. They don't like taking risks. And they really kind of a switch hitter about teamwork versus independent work. Now, page 10, we're just about done, is the summary page, and that's exactly what it is. So you get that code, you get the top 5 and bottom 3 basic interest areas out of the 30, the top 10 and bottom 5 occupational matches out of the 130, the personal style preferences, abbreviated. And again, it's a really nice page, it catches the eye, but try not to let your client get stuck on their top view and be dictated to by that. So here's what that looks like. Again, very appealing, one-page summary of everything. The bottom of page 10 is really mostly there for you, the counselor. And really, arguably, you ought to flip back and look at that before you look at everything else. I usually don't, to be honest, because I want to see the REASAC code and the occupations. But this, often once you look at those, when you've done a few strongs, you actually kind of know what you're going to see when you get here. The big feature here is that you actually have a table of how they responded. Remember, most items are in a 5-point Likert-type scale, strongly like to strongly dislike. And this tells you for each section of the strong, occupations, college majors, leisure activities, etc., how often, what percentage of the time they chose each option. And it also then averages that out for the test as a whole. This can be very helpful, particularly if you get relatively flat profiles. You want to know why. If you have a lot of high scores, an awful lot of matches, typically these are people who said they like practically everything. It's like, that sounds interesting. Yeah, I'd love to do that. Whereas if you get the low ones, it's people who basically don't like anything. When people express a great many dislikes, especially strong dislikes, they're not going to get many occupational matches. And so if they're wondering why they didn't, it's, well, Mikey, you hate everything. Basically, don't put it quite like that to them, but that's what it boils down to. They dislike a lot of activities, a lot of things. There aren't many occupations where they're going to like most of what they do. Simple as that. There also is some information here about the validity of the protocol. You don't have a lot of trouble with faking uninterest inventories. They're not typically being used for placement, by the human resources department, for example, or hiring decisions. They're being used, for counseling purposes. So the person actively wants to know what the results are. I suppose if you were using it to, judge whether someone was a good fit for an occupation or a job that you were hiring them for, they might have some motivation to dissemble, so that that information could be useful. So here's what it looks like, and what you can see with the person we we're looking at is that she does, in fact, have quite a few strong dislikes. And that's why you had very little interest in certain domains. And as you looked at those domains, if we had looked at every section, say realistic or investigative, in terms of the occupations, you would have found that virtually none of the occupations had scores, much above like 20. It was all like, no, I'm not going to do that. She did, however, express a few strong likes and a moderate number of likes. Um, she omitted one item, no biggie. Most people don't omit any. If they omit a lot, that does raise questions. And then they come up with this sort of typicality index, fancy little measure of whether they responded in patterns that are typical of like people. And really all you have to do there is just read what it is written, and almost invariably, in my experience, it appears consistent, and you're all set. So that's it. Wrapping up, you have here a well-developed test that's been updated periodically, a very long, rich history of use in career counseling. You get matches to over 100 occupations, currently 130, matches to dozens of domains, groups of occupations, office management, nature and agriculture, etc., and a kind of a personality profile, if you will, using Holland's Rheostat coding system. What more do you want in an interest inventory? All of which said, we're going to say good day and see you another time.